I want to say I consider myself fortunate to be a local journalist in our community. Um, I've been able to do this work for the vast majority of my career right here where I'm raising my kids and where my husband works. Reporting on the local issues and people who live here has the rare power to strengthen and connect a community like nothing else. And quality local journalism holds decision makers to account. It delves into problems that deserve our attention and it looks for the truth. And to be able to do that in Sarnia Lambton is a privilege. That being said, I work in a profession that is under attack. It's being usurped by this age of social media, where people believe they can find accurate and unbiased information, community reporting on the internet, and they don't have to pay for it. We live in a time when the lines have become dangerously blurred about what is legitimate news and what is fake news. That fake news that we all know it came across in the last presidential um, uh, time period. So when Alan McEwen asked me, thank you, Alan, to speak today, I read with real interest the 8 Unitarian Universalist principles, and I see that they include a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, as well as the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within your congregation and in society at large. So I'd like to examine what's going on in Sarnia Lambton when it comes to the local media and democracy. I'm going to start with a description of what an election period looked like in the 1990s when I started to report here. I worked at the Observer, and each one of us at the Observer was assigned a specific candidate, whether it was a provincial or a federal or a municipal election. At that time in our newsroom, we had 19 reporters and photographers, 19. For the size of our community, Sarnia Lambton was really well served by the media at that time. And this would have continued well into the 2000s, like probably till about 2015 or so. So you got 19 photographers and reporters at the Observer, 2 fully staffed radio stations, the Sarnia Gazette at the time, remember the Sarnia Gazette? It published every week. CKCO TV, London Free Press, they had Sarnia bureaus and staff here that worked every day here. And CBC Radio had local correspondents, and I worked with them for several years. So, as I say, no matter whether it was provincial, federal, or municipal, we followed the candidates very carefully. And what that entailed was going out to their press conferences. There's no press conferences anymore, I can tell you that. There's very few anyway. But they'd hold press conferences, which were platforms for them to explain what they thought were the important issues of the day and converse with people face to face. And we've lost that. We've lost that in a big way, and I'll get into that a little bit more. Specifically, I want to talk about all candidates meetings. And I don't know if anyone who's listening to this or is in this room has been to an all candidates meeting. However, they tended to be, in the past in Sarnia Lambton, really well attended. Literally every municipality in the rural area would have their all candidates meetings. And then Sarnia always had a good number. And they were well attended by journalists as well. So then if you couldn't make it, at least you got a report about what happened and you knew what the issues were. So in my mind, an all candidates meeting, and a lot of them, is a reflection of the health of our democracy. You got a lot of all candidates meetings, then you've got a lot of conversation about what is important to the people of the day, and they're talking to the people that they're going to vote ultimately into office. So that has a great deal to do with democracy in my mind. This last election on October 24th, In Sarnia, we had 2 meetings, I think there were 2, and they weren't called all candidates meetings. They were called something like meet and greets. And a meet and greet is very different in my estimation. They're valuable. I'm not saying they're not. It's just that they don't provide a platform where the issues are debated or discussed. And we've lost that. There was one all candidates meeting, and it was hosted at the Imperial Theater. It was hosted by the Chamber of Commerce and the bookkeeper. It was a great event. And going there, it was very well attended, by the way. There was really good discussion, but I have to tell you, I had a revelation that night about local media. I covered it for the Journal. To me, it was a no-brainer that I would go to the only all candidates meeting that was going to be held for this municipal election. Of course I would. Because to me, that's important, that those issues that are getting discussed there become reflected in the local media. I was the only journalist in the room. And I've thought about this a great deal. That's a problem. I think I did as good a job as I possibly could. I certainly tried. But I only have one perspective. And in the past, we would have had numerous journalists providing numerous perspectives. And that's what you want in a democratic society. And we're not getting that anymore. And that's a problem. Oh dear, I underlined it. I underlined that point. I worked for a news outlet called the Sarnia Journal, and it's been around for 8 years now. The Journal was published every week, and it landed on your doorstep. 30,000 homes got it every week until this summer. And it didn't make it, unfortunately, in that form through the pandemic. Because like every other business, havoc was wreaked on the bottom line. We're not doing a hard copy, but the good news is that it is online. And it's on every social media platform you can think of, and you can sign up for daily news bulletins if you want from the Journal. I'm not here to plug it, but to illustrate to you the changes that have taken place. And they're concerning, because the Journal is now not as visible. People like hard copy, right? I think we can all agree on that. So we can say a free press is important and that local journalism is important, but it's a business like none other, and it needs support for it to stay robust. Now, at the same time, I want to tell you, the Observer and Sarnia this week, they work out of the same newsroom right now. Remember, I told you there were 19 reporters and photographers in the 90s? There's now 4. Blackburn News has so few reporters left in their newsrooms that they were not able to man their newsroom on election night the way they have for as long as I can recall. Millennium Free Press, CKCO TV bureaus, Sarnia Gazette, they've long since closed. Let's also talk a little bit about why journalism is important to democracy, because after all, that's what I was asked to discuss with you today. Election turnout in Sarnia was down 8 percentage points on October 24th. That's about 40% of eligible voters coming out to vote. That's about middle of the pack for Ontario municipalities, but in my opinion, that's just dismal, 40%. It reflects a lack of engagement. Local journalism, when it's robust and really well supported, when there's a lot of us out there writing about the issues and attending all candidates meetings, it's what engages voters. And when you engage voters, you get discussion about the issues that are important to our community. There's a buzz about the election, and then people go out and vote. And that's not happening to the degree that it used to happen. It's my opinion, and just my opinion, that when engagement's low, the incumbents have an enormous advantage in an election. So it's more difficult for new voices to get their opinions out there. And that's where democracy suffers again. It also suffers when there's very little local reporting. And that's because the institutions that we hold dear, like city council, the hospital boards, the school boards, they operate with very little scrutiny. And you might ask why that's a problem. Well, it's a problem because those councils and boards are your decision makers. They take your tax dollars and they're the ones deciding how your roads are going to be fixed, and how many potholes you're going to have on your street, how many nurses are going to be hired at your hospital this year, how many nurses are going to be laid off, what schools are going to open, what schools are going to close. They're making really important decisions that actually impact your life in a very personal way. And when they sit down at their board meetings, there are no longer enough journalists in our community to attend those meetings. So we don't know what the discussion is. I was on a trip with my husband recently, and a fellow I had just met, he asked me what I do for a living. And when I told him, he immediately asked me how much investigative reporting I do, because that's what people assume, that reporters always do investigative reporting. So his question kind of stopped me up a little bit, and I thought about it, and I reluctantly told him that there was a time I did nothing but investigative feature writing, and I covered municipal council. That was my job for years. But now I barely do any of that. No local media outlet in Sarnia-Lambton has enough journalists to assign to a story that's going to take more than a day to pump out. So you have to do all your interviews and do your writing and get that story out there in one day, or you're not doing your job. That precludes investigations on the most part, in my opinion. And I want to say one more thing about what's happening locally. When I told a few of my colleagues that I was coming to talk to you today, he said, Cathy, there's something you absolutely must get out there. So here it is. On an increasing basis, our local community has institutions, certainly corporations, that have public relations people. And what's happening, I've never seen this before, is that instead of allowing local journalists to talk directly to the people who are running the show over at City Hall or running the school boards or whatever it is, they get their public relations person to call us back. They generally don't have the answer to your question. They are there specifically to stop you from asking the question to the person who actually knows what's going on. This is a real problem. I'll share an experience last month. I wanted to do a story about what's going on downtown. We've got some huge developments, with Bayside Mall being redeveloped. There's a new apartment building about to open. A whole bunch of buildings downtown, big historical buildings, are being renovated. What are they going to be? These were my questions. They're pretty basic questions, if you ask me. I called up the department head, who should be able to just answer the questions, because that's how it's always been in my experience. And instead of getting an answer from him, I got voicemail, that's fine. I got a call back from the public relations guy at City Hall. And he said, well, he's way too busy, the department head is way too busy to talk to you. Tell me what you want and I'll go get it. This is a terrific problem when it took him 3 weeks to get back to me. And when he did get back to me, he told me that I needed to file some Freedom of Information submissions in order to get this information. This is not controversial information on any level. And I find that really concerning. That's just a small example. Can you imagine if it was something a little bit deeper? It's something that my colleagues are experiencing more and more. And when this happened to me last month, I mean, it took a month to enroll because it took so many weeks for them to get back to me. I was stymied. This is different, and this is happening everywhere. It's happening at school boards, it's happening at hospital, it happens here at City Hall, and it's certainly a normalcy with the provincial and federal government, but now it's striking our municipal level, and that's a worry. Anyway, I kind of carried on that point a little longer than I intended, but you can tell it's disturbing, you know. I think what we should do is talk about what we can do about this, because I don't want to be just doom and gloom here. And there are lots of things that we can do. But I'm going to focus on two important points in my mind. First of all, please read local news sources. Find a local news source that you trust or listen to, or not just reading, but also listening. And pay for a subscription. Donate to it if that's how the platform is. Take out an advertisement, because without revenue, they can't hire journalists, right? They can't pay the people to put the product out. And we're all going to get certain amounts of information from social media, But I ask you, when you see something on Facebook that interests you, read it with a critical mind. Check it out and make sure through the type of sources that you actually do trust, make sure that that story is true before you hit the share button. At this point, I'm going to bring up my colleague, Pam Wright, and she's going to talk to you for a little while. And I understand later on we can do some Q&A. All right, thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Still morning, yes. I would just like to thank Cathy and thank what is your Unitarians for, I was going to say, I was trying to remember the whole name of it, but thank you for the opportunity to share. And when Cathy's talking, we've been colleagues and friends for a long time, and we've experienced a lot of the very, very similar path. And what she's saying is exactly true. And in fact, I think we've shared many a rant about it over the phone. Like, can you believe this? And anyway, I work in Chatham, Kent right now. I work for a small paper called the Chatham Voice, which was quite similar, or is quite similar to the Sarnia Journal, started by some Chatham Daily News people that were let go, as the journal was started by some Sarnia Observer people that were given the axe, not to anything because they were doing anything wrong, but because the cuts that were made by Sun Media at the time. But I'm in a little bit of a different situation. There's more media where I'm working. There are usually 4 reporters at all things, sometimes 5, sometimes 6. And it's the proximity to Windsor. It's easy for the Windsor bureaus to come there and send people. So I think that's the reason. But I'm not the only one usually. I usually have some company. But the election experience that I had with our last election was very, very similar. Voter turnout down there was 30%, like 40% is like, wow, compared to what I was seeing. And there were forums. Well, because it's such a big area, they divided up into wards. It would be like if all of Lambton County was voting together. And they would have little meetings, but they would just have them in their own little towns, like say Townsville area or whatever. So there were no meetings where a person could, they used to be at all candidates meetings, they would have prepared questions, the media could ask questions, there was no hiding anything. It was, you had access. And there was no access at this. I went to one meeting, it was put on by the Kent Federation of Agriculture, And it was like this weird meet and greet thing where each candidate had 90 seconds to speak about their platform, and then you could wander around and ask them questions. And I don't know, it just seemed, everyone seemed very mixed up. Like, what are we supposed to be doing? And I don't know, not very effective, difficult to cover. Um, and just, so, the night of the election, and I'm finding we used to have great excitement on election nights. And, there was this kind of a sense of excitement. And that's just, I find that's kind of dribbling away. It's just aren't engaged. And I think that's where local journalism has a role to play because, we need to, you can't make decisions without information. And you can't get information if your people are your candidates or your elected representatives or your high ranking government officials aren't giving it to you. And I wanted to talk about that, like Cathy's illustration of trying to get some stories about the building, what's going on downtown. Um, I call that, I've been calling it now for a few years, but I call it the electronic fortress. Increasingly, we're coming up against this, like everybody's circling the wagon, like there's just like becoming an impenetrable wall, and it's very, very difficult to get information. And you're filing these freedom of information applications for just basic, to find out basic things that every single person, I mean, you're paying the bills, right? We are paying the bills. We're the taxpayer, but we can't find out how our money's being spent. And it's becoming a really kind of a weird experience. And it's can be make you upset. Let's just say that. Um, I still have access. I haven't, the municipality that I deal with hasn't really put up that wall yet. I think they're trying to. Um, so I'm not really, as long as, there used to be back in the day, and I'm sure Steve would know about this, but you used to be able to make a connection with someone, whether it be a police chief or somebody in government, whatever, and you would have like a give and take, and a trustworthy reporter they'd share information with you, and then, you wouldn't burn them, so to speak. So, but anyway, that's all gone. Like access is just almost nothing. It's especially concerning with um, police departments. Um, I don't know. I don't want to go into this too far, but just to say that I think I have a real fear that, like, police don't share any information except for what they want you to know. And that to me is pretty damaging to democracy because, these workers are very highly paid. They take the biggest chunk of a municipal budget, big ticket item, and they don't answer except if they feel like it. Or if they have their legislators do so. So that's very concerning to democracy. Um, I had there were a lot of COVID-19 demonstrations down my way, and this has happened to me 3 times now. And I wrote a column about it too. But they're all out there waving, "Media's the virus, fake news," like the whole. So I just pull my car over there, and I'm going to talk to these people, right? Like, because I'm offended, folks. I try to bring the truth as best I can to a story or to and whatever that you're working on. And, so talking to these people, and they just, you're the problem. And I just find like we're living in more and more, like they talk about the silos. Like, I couldn't make them understand and they couldn't make me understand. And I find that very difficult. Like, I don't know where we're going on that one. So, um, Yeah, so the FOI, yeah, that's very concerning. I'll just, I'll just share with you, before our premier was elected the first time, I went down to cover a rally where he was speaking. It was in Chatham. And we waited, there were 4 local reporters, and we waited outside the door because we wanted to have a chance to talk to this person who could become the Premier of Ontario. And we waited and we waited and we waited, and there was nobody tending to us, like as a media person or anything like that. And then finally, this woman struts by. I will say she was strutting, and she looked back at us, you know, the little group of local reporters, and she said, "He's not going to talk to you." And we're like, "What?" And in the meantime, we're standing beside a room where he's being interviewed by like Global TV, CTV, CBC, whoever else, right? Like he's talking to them, but he's not talking to the little people down, you know, the small media outlet. And I'll never forget, I ended up writing a letter and doing whatever, but it's just now that woman who spoke to us that way, she's I think heading up one of his communication teams now. So that just shows you. And how much time? Is there going to be a hook that comes? 1 minute? Okay. So just to wrap it up, I think, as Cathy said, there are some, you know, what can we do? And I think it's to write letters to the editor. That's a wonderful thing to do. Support local media, but make sure that you're well informed. Make sure that you know. No, you don't like just taking something as gospel is not the way we can do it anymore. We really have to be critical thinkers and help out your local media. If they ask you a question, please give them the honest answer. Thank you very much.